Okay, I think we should get started. Good morning, everyone, on this wonderful Thursday morning. My name is Ashley Christie. I'm the Executive Director of GRID Greater Los Angeles, and I'm so excited to be here with everyone today. So excited for this webinar, but I just want to note that we are recording this Zoom session, so I hope you're all good with that. And let's just get into it. So proud to be representing Grid Alternatives and our mission as a nonprofit clean tech installer, whose mission is to bring solar, energy storage, and job training opportunities to many affordable housing folks in attendance and their residents. And we're so excited that we're able to expand our clean energy work to deliver clean mobility technologies to the communities that we serve, including renters of affordable housing that's in line with our mission. This is a significant opportunity to have very local air quality benefits in communities with some of the worst air, often due to vehicle emissions, help with reduction in fuel prices for folks who really need it, and increasing mobility of at-risk populations, and allowing folks to get to their jobs, doctor's appointments, and just go about their day-to-day lives. Today's discussion previews what will be a major equity program for California's EV and clean mobility adoption. GRID hopes to be thought and implementation partners with many of you here today as you plan for clean mobility at your properties. So please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We're super thankful for SCE for their support in hosting this important event and for taking the lead in expanding clean mobility access in affordable housing communities. I want to give a special shout out and thank you to all of our speakers, and want to take this time to introduce one of my esteemed colleagues, Zach Franklin. He has been a legend here at GRID, the National GRID, since 2006, and has helped us grow into a nationally recognized organization. A lot of his work has been helping shape the GRID vision to a clean, renewable energy just future that includes everyone. Zach has launched and led a lot of our expanding work, including clean mobility. And this initiative is initially focused in California, but he's had his hand in everything. So without further ado, I do want to make sure that I give Zach a warm welcome. Welcome, Zach. Good to see you.
Thank you, Ashley, and thanks everyone for taking your time out of your day to join us on this important topic. Again, I'm Zach Franklin. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at GRID Alternatives. In addition to the background that Ashley shared, I also, prior to that, worked in the affordable housing sector. So this is a sector that is near and dear to my heart. And I also know from my own experience that, folks in the sector have their hands full just providing affordable housing, and that there's all sorts of cool things like the mobility and sustainability that everybody wants to do. But at the same point in time, it can be really challenging to implement all this great stuff while you're also just trying to kind of do some really challenging core work being a housing provider. And so I think that's the point of not just this discussion, this presentation, but all of the resources that we're here to talk about from CA Edison, is that we know that in order to make this work, outside folks outside of the housing sector really need to come with a lot of resources, support, time, everything like that. So very much have a deep respect for all of the housers on this call and all of the work that you do every day, particularly today, given the housing crisis we're facing. And so just a couple of key things just to kind of cue this up more broadly, particularly for folks who are still getting their head around, like, well, why should we be thinking about something like clean mobility as a housing provider? And at the end of the day, it's about gasoline, right? We had some UC Berkeley students do a study for us, found that low-income households in the United States spend over $77 billion a year on gasoline. Among other things, that's money that can't be used for things like paying the rent. And up until now, it really hasn't been a choice, particularly for many of our communities that don't have access to good transit, right? Paying for gasoline is not an option if you want to be able to get to work, access services, all that good stuff. We now have a choice. And that's just thanks to technology. That wasn't something I could have said a couple of years ago. So there's an opportunity here to not only dramatically help our families reduce the amount of money they spend on transportation fuel, but then to have all these broader benefits around air quality and environment and climate change. So it's a good time to be having this conversation. I think what we've learned also in doing this work is that there is a dramatic benefit of unlocking home charging in particular, not just in terms of convenience, plug it in when you get home, go to sleep, wake up in the morning with a full tank of gas, but also in the terms of cost, that the energy cost in the home environment is a lot lower than if you go to one of these paying charging stations out in the community, a lot lower. And if you're a low-income homeowner, you can do that at home. You can get on these discounted rates, which is great. But for renters, it's really it requires a collaboration between the tenant and the landlord to unlock this, really inexpensive, let alone clean transportation fuel. And so that's the opportunity that we have here, is to make that work, knowing that it requires a lot of support. One thing I'll just plug real briefly, and if folks are interested, we can talk about this offline. Grid is also working with the California Air Resources Board on the vehicle side of things. We built a project called Access Clean California that provides streamlined access to all of the state's EV equity programs. So if your question is, well, why should I put in these chargers if my tenants aren't able to afford these cars, right? We have a whole separate parallel program that we can talk about offline to really make it easy for you all to support your tenants in getting the vehicles as well. And there's a lot of great subsidy available at the state level. And as Lisa will talk about, I think Edison has some funding as well. So that's kind of like high level why I think this is worth everybody's time, why we think this is worth everybody's time. But we also want to hear from you all. So as we have the discussion, there'll be a lot of questions and answers that we do with our panelists that we think we know what people are interested in, but tell us, put in the chat box questions you want to make sure get answered throughout the conversation as we go. Some of those questions we can try to answer in real time in chat, other we'll get into in the conversation. And then there's just going to be an open Q&A at the end as well. So we really want to hear from you, make sure we're customizing this conversation and information we provide to your specific needs and interests. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lisa Arianes, who's the Senior Manager of E-Mobility Business Development and Partnerships at Southern California Edison, who's going to tell us about all of the great programming that they have available for this sector.
Thank you so much, Zach. Really appreciate that kind introduction. And thank you again for hosting this webinar. Really looking forward to this discussion today. And I will be briefly covering Southern California Edison's Charge Ready program, which has significant offerings to install charging infrastructure for multifamily properties, including affordable housing properties. So if we could begin with the slides, I'll dive right in. We can move forward once more. Thank you so much. So Charge Ready supports the expansion of
Lisa, I think we can't hear you.
How about now?
Yes, great, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So our Charge Ready, sorry if you missed the whole intro, but thanks again for hosting this. So our Charge Ready program supports the expansion of EV charging for light duty vehicles at multifamily properties, workplaces, public places, and fleets. There's a big emphasis in our program on multifamily properties. Why do we do this? One, we want to help California meet its climate and zero emission goals, including zero carbon by 2045, or being carbon neutral rather. In our own Pathway 2045 analysis that studies how we can get to that carbon neutrality by 2045, we believe we will have to electrify 75% of those vehicles that are on California roads by that time. And also, we need to reduce range anxiety if we're going to be able to have people adopt electric vehicles, and this is a big part of it. So let's get into it. First of all, multifamily property, pretty simple definition, obviously, residential housing with 2 or more tenants and shared parking areas. This includes apartment buildings, townhomes, condominiums, and other types of multifamily housing as well. So we can move to the next slide. Couple of quick program highlights. We have $436 million of funding to support EV charging infrastructure. We provide significant financial and technical assistance to get charging stations installed, And this budget will support up to about 38,000 charging ports. We have a target of installing 50% of those in disadvantaged communities with a capital DAC, so per the Cal EPA EnviroScreen tool, which I'll cover briefly in a moment. And there are three program offerings with some different incentive options. So moving on, disadvantaged communities, I want to be clear how we define this for our program because we do have to follow these guidelines. In our program, a disadvantaged community is designated by the Cal EPA EnviroScreen 3.0, scoring 75% or higher in that tool. How are those scores developed? They're determined by air quality, congestion, average commute times, as well as income and other factors. And that's how that is defined. The program I'm about to share applies to all multifamily properties, not just those in disadvantaged communities. However, there are some additional incentives for those that do fall within these disadvantaged communities and this definition. So we can move on. Thank you. The charge. So here's probably the main thing I want to emphasize. This diagram showing what does Edison, the utility, provide. So for customers in our service area, we cover the cost of what we call make-ready infrastructure. This is all the way from the grid to the charger. Everything you see in yellow, Edison provides the design, permitting, construction, installation, and maintenance of all of that. And that is a big part of the headache and hassle of getting charging stations installed. So I'll go into a little bit more detail, but if you can try to keep this in mind, the charging stations themselves will have a few different flavors of how we incentivize the installation. But this is key because without a program like this, typically a customer will have to design, permit, manage, and construct everything to the right of that dotted line. And so therefore there's big financial savings in this program as a result, as well as just taking away a lot of the hassle. We can move on to the next slide. So I'll try to quickly go over the three program options. The first is the charging infrastructure and rebate. It's basically that diagram I just showed where we provide, again, infrastructure from the grid to the charger, and we provide a rebate to offset the cost of the site host purchasing and installing approved charging equipment. There are a couple of variations for multifamily properties located in disadvantaged communities. We can pay a one-time payment to offset the maintenance and networking fees associated with the level 2 chargers that would be installed for a 10-year period. And some customers do prefer to do their own design, permitting, installation, and construction. We do have an option that allows for that, where we provide just a rebate check up to 80% of what it would have cost SCE to do if we had been doing the work. So program option 2 is turnkey installation for multifamily properties. This is particular to sites located in those disadvantaged communities. This is full turnkey. This is from the grid and includes the installation of the charger and the ongoing maintenance of that equipment. There is a cap up to 2,500 ports that we will be allowing in this version of the program. But a huge value for those properties that need the extra support, not just with the infrastructure, but also with the purchase and installation and ongoing maintenance of that charging equipment. So we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So the third option is the new construction rebate for multifamily buildings. This incentivizes multifamily properties to go above and beyond Cal Green Code. Right now, Cal Green Code requires 10% of the spaces to be EV capable, meaning have the conduit and wires in place, but not the actual charging station. So for properties that go above and beyond that requirement by installing the charging stations, we offer a $3,500 rebate per port. We can go to the next slide. So I'll try to wrap it up quickly. There's some key program requirements. Participants should be Edison customers, non-residential customers, meaning representing the property in some way and the common areas. It could be the owner, property manager, or another entity. We do require consent from the property owner, meaning we'll ask for signatures in the application and agreement process. We do require easement rights to be granted to SCE. Remember, SCE is installing infrastructure and owning and maintaining it over the long term. Therefore, we need an easement to have access. So I want to point out just a couple other things. We require a 4-port minimum be installed. So a minimum of 4 connectors for EVs at the site. And we do have an approved product list that site hosts must choose from, but there's an ample list there with many, many options. We can move to the next slide. These are pending rebate amounts, pending CPUC approval still, which we hope to have by the end of the year. I want to highlight the middle column for multifamily. 50% of what we believe is the base cost of a charger. So $1,450 for every level 2 charging port. And if that multifamily property is in a disadvantaged community, then it's a $2,900 rebate. Again, this still needs to be approved by the CPUC. We can keep moving. A couple other available programs is a pre-owned EV rebate. We currently offer $1,000 to Edison residential customers who purchase or lease a used electric vehicle. And starting in November, we're planning to increase that for income qualified customers up to $4,000. For any Californian purchasing a new EV, the Clean Fuel Reward currently offers $1,500 off the purchase price of a new EV. And I'll wrap it up by plugging our transportation electrification advisory services. If you don't know where to begin, if you aren't sure that you're ready to apply to our program, please reach out to us. Please visit us at sce.com/TEAS. We can perform EV readiness studies, a study of your site to help you understand how you can install EV charging stations at your property, and we can get you ready to apply for our Charge Ready program, which will provide that EV charging infrastructure for you. There are more services and features to come, but we highly encourage you to visit us at that web address and request help. We're ready to support you. Thank you so much. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Lisa. And again, I said in the chat box here, all these slides will be sent out afterwards to folks who've registered for this. So you have, I know it's a lot of information. You have a chance to kind of digest it in detail. But I think the big takeaway is that, SCE's got a lot of resources to help walk you through the next steps if you're interested. So really appreciate all that information. And now we'll switch over to sort of the housing perspective. We have 2 great affordable housing leaders in the space who are here to share their experience. We'll start with Abigail Solis, who's the manager of sustainable energy solutions from Self-Help Enterprises.
Great, thank you, Zach. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here and joining us for this very important conversation. So I am Abigail Solis, and I work with Self-Help Enterprises. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about not only our affordable housing properties, but an exciting program that we want to share with you today. Next slide. So a little bit about Self-Help. We are a nationally recognized community development and affordable housing organization. We are located in the heart of the San Joaquin Valley, and our mission is to work together with low-income families to build and sustain healthy homes and communities. Our service area is comprised of 8 counties across the San Joaquin Valley, which is the world's most productive ag region. We develop quality, affordable rental apartments to serve the housing needs of our low-income residents, and most of those are underserved farm working communities. Since 1965, so for over 50 years, we've been in local disadvantaged communities and touched the lives of almost 60,000 families. Next slide. So in order to give you a better perspective of what life is like in the San Joaquin Valley, I want to share just a little bit about our region. So you may be familiar, but if not, the San Joaquin Valley is, like I mentioned, the world's leading ag and dairy region, and most of the people that we serve work as farm laborers. We have hot summers, cold winters, and something very unique about this area is that we have hundreds of small disadvantaged communities. These are small towns that are unincorporated, that do not have a city council or a paid staff that can work on their behalf. Most of our residents that we serve are very hardworking families, yet they still have high poverty rates. They are dealing with very high costs for their household energy, as well as hundreds of small communities are dealing with contaminated drinking water that has nitrates and arsenic. They also deal with extreme air pollution, causing medical problems like asthma, allergy, and valley fever. Next slide. Just specifically about the transportation needs in the San Joaquin Valley, because the area is so large and there are so many small communities in between, there's a lot of transportation and travel needed. So there are many small communities that are connected, yet they're not walkable. So what we see is that most families have multiple vehicles. Most of those vehicles are older and inefficient, causing high rates of air pollution. But because these communities are so rural, there are often few public transportation options. Usually there's a bus that comes a few times a day, but to be able to use other programs, for example, rideshare programs like example Uber or Lyft, it's very costly, very expensive, because taxis and rideshare programs usually do not make their way out to the rural areas. So because they're so expensive, these families have very limited options. When it comes to EV chargers, they're almost non-existent. It's very hard to find an electric vehicle charging station in one of these communities. This, of course, is important because it often turns people away from considering purchasing an EV vehicle. Next slide. So I want to share with you a very exciting program called MioCar. MioCar, these are electric vehicles that are at our self-help affordable housing locations, and this program is a nonprofit funded by the California Air Resources Board, a partnership with Mobility Development and UC Davis. The concept is that this is an electric car sharing network that can be shared amongst the members of this service. The cars are located across 2 counties in Tulare and Kern County in 6 communities. And members can use the service to rent vehicles by the hour at a very low rate. A network of vehicles is available to our members at any time. They are housed at our affordable housing sites. However, you do not have to live at a site to be able to use the service. We are really excited about this program because it's safe, reliable, convenient, and it also provides for many people the first opportunity to use not only an electric vehicle, but also become familiar with the charging station. Next slide. This program started as self-help's effort to want to service our residents and be able to provide a quality life to them outside of just the area, the actual housing they live in. But we have seen that programs like MioCar are actually a community resource. This provides an affordable transportation option for the entire community that wasn't there before. These are member-controlled trips. You can control your MioCar with an app on your phone. It doesn't require a storefront or anyone to be there to rent the vehicle out to you. So it's a very innovative idea, available to everyone, good for the environment. And like I said, for many people, this is the only time that they've been able to use an electric vehicle and the charging station. So it puts in people's minds that thought that perhaps, they can continue to use electric vehicles and perhaps one day even own one. Next slide. I just want to take some time to talk about how our program was so successful and things for you to consider if you are considering a program like this. Self-Help Enterprises believes that all projects should be community-led. Start with the community when developing a project idea. Ensure that the community supports the idea and look to them for input. You will be surprised how much community residents know about their local community and can help you develop out your project. And also, from the start that when the program is ready to go, the community will support it and ultimately use the program. Next slide. I want to mention the importance of outreach and education in programs like electric vehicle and charging programs. Like I mentioned before, many of these users are new to EVs and the charging stations, and this can be an intimidating process for folks that have never used it before. We realized this early on, and we went a step beyond just advertising or marketing the program and created safe places for residents and members to ask questions, to do test drives, to do test charging, plug your charger, disconnect your charger. And for many people, it really acted like a training, and that made them feel comfortable with using these technologies and made them feel comfortable in becoming a member. And this is critical to success because we often see that when low-income residents, or all residents for that matter, do not understand something, they're usually too shy to ask for help. So it's important to offer that help and make it readily available to anyone who needs it. That will make your program more successful. Next slide. Want to just focus on the importance of community partnerships. We know that in low-income and disadvantaged communities, especially in the San Joaquin Valley, traditional marketing doesn't always reach the intended audience for multiple reasons. One being the digital divide. Not all residents have access to the internet or a good Wi-Fi connection. So it's important to use local partners to spread the word about your programs. We found that we had a lot of success when we partnered with schools, clinics, local CBOs that residents know and trust. Next slide. Just wanted to share a little bit about our vision and what we would love to see. Self-Help Enterprises would love to be able to provide EV chargers at 100% of our sites. However, there are challenges to expanding such programs. One is the upfront capital cost of installing chargers. This is very difficult for low-income housing providers. Also, sometimes we find funding program restrictions. For example, minimum charger requirements. Recently, we heard of 10 chargers required. Many of the properties in the San Joaquin Valley are small and just cannot accommodate 10 chargers. So we really ask for flexibility in funding programs. We ask funders to consider things like allowing multiple properties in order to meet the minimum charger requirements if they're a certain distance from each other. Sorry, I know I'm out of time. So you can read here more information about what we find challenging and also opportunities to expand. So next slide and final slide. If you have any questions for me, this is how you can contact me. And of course, there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Abigail. That was fantastic, and doing just such tremendous and kind of cutting edge work at Self-Help. So really appreciate sharing your experiences with all of us. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce Miguel Garcia, the Director of Real Estate Development at Innovative Housing Communities, for another affordable housing perspective.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you guys for joining us, and thank you for inviting me on the panel. My name is Miguel Garcia. I'm the Real Estate Development Director at Innovative Housing Opportunities, and I do want to just share with you a little bit about our project we just finished in Anaheim. It was a senior development. It was 54 units, and as part of our organization's mission is to install EV charging stations on all of them. But before I get into that, a little bit about IHO. We've been around for 45 years. We're actually celebrating our 45th year anniversary this year. But our goal is to enrich communities by providing high quality, affordable housing. And for us, it starts with housing mission as part of our core belief. Next slide. I would read through all these slides, but I just feel I'm probably going to run out of time as well. Our development goals, we develop vibrant, comprehensive, and catalytic communities. We go through different programs and we take advantage of a lot of different programs. I really appreciate Lisa's information here. I'm going to be tapping her after this panel so that we can start really thinking about California's future, because we are going all electric, whether we want it or not, and California is transforming. So there are a lot of programs that IHO likes to be in the innovative part. It's part of our name, and bring those programs into our projects. So this is El Verano, and this is how it started. Developing in Anaheim, developing affordable housing in Anaheim is difficult. I thought it was going to be difficult. It ended up being fairly simple, but they just part of the city, they wanted us to maintain what we promised, and this is what we promised. And next slide, please. That's what we delivered. So it's very a mirror image of what was submitted during our entitlement process. And one of the things about this project, and the reason I'm bringing it up to all the folks and presenting it, is parking was a big driver. Parking, as we all know, as affordable housing developers, parking is one of the key components that affects our sites. So this project is located at 1248 Lincoln. We started construction in July of 2019, and we completed construction on November 2020. The asterisk here is that in the middle of construction, we were caught with the lockdown, and there was a lot of uncertainty with our construction crew and materials, but luckily we were able to finish on time. So just the other thing that I do want to showcase is these are the unit mix. We have a total of 54, so they're primarily 1-bedroom units and 2-bedroom units, and these are specifically for seniors over the age of 62. So I want you guys to keep that in mind, because we assume that a lot of folks were not going to be driving, because there are folks with seniors 62. Half of them are PSH units for at-risk homeless seniors at the age of 62. Next slide, please. These are a bit of the site amenities that we were able to put in there. The lower left corner, you will see there's an art mural or an art project, and this is a live green wall that we were able to get all the community members and some of the residents help us finish it and install it after they moved in. So this was all part of our construction. Next slide, please. So we're talking about the EV charging stations, and one of our challenges here is that this site itself sits on about 1.5 acres, and the total parking spaces that we were able to negotiate with the city was 42 parking spaces, 0.8 spaces per unit. We all know that as affordable housing developers, we can get variances and we can get a lot of parking reduction variances on this, but the council members and the folks that sit at the city and the neighborhood council folks also know the reality is like, hey, you can't reduce parking because folks are going to be parking there, and there's going to be an overflow of parking into the neighborhoods. So for us, we were able to come up to 42 to accommodate a lot of the input that we got from the community. And we set up 2 spaces for electrical for EV charging. Now it's charging station ready, it's not complete. And the other thing is we had to include a post office space And then once you include really the ADA units or the ADA parking spaces, we're really left with 0.6 parking spaces per unit. Right now, just part of my presentation here to everyone in the room and to all the folks is that parking is always a challenge, and this is the way we came up. I don't have a solution, but I'm just presenting some of the challenges that we have. So now, can we go back, please? We don't have visitor parking. So this includes tenant parking, and this doesn't include staff parking, and it also doesn't include property management parking. When I talk about resident services staff, it's all the folks that come in and give service providers to these seniors as well. So for us, parking spaces are critical, and part of my idea is part of our goal for future developments is how do we combine everything together, understanding what the parking needs are going to be, and then incorporating these EV charging station parking spaces within our project. So that is pretty much where we have now is that we have these EV charging stations. We're looking at programs to provide EV charging systems on them. And the other thing is right now these spaces are open as resident or visitor parking. And but in the future, what we're toying with the idea of making these temporary parking spaces once we have a charging station on them, and then really understanding, working with the residents to figure out how we can work with them together to making sure that there's enough parking spaces for people when they come and visit them, when they want to get service providers or they're trying to get services, how we use all our parking spaces efficiently. So that is it for me. I did want to showcase this project. It's a great project. If you guys are ever in Anaheim, please feel free to come and visit us. Zach, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Miguel. Thank you to all the panelists. It's just great information. And like we said before, all this information will be sent out to everyone afterwards so you can review in detail. We're going to do a bit of a roundtable discussion, then followed by an open Q&A. Also have a chance for folks who are dialed in just by phone to ask questions during the Q&A. But please continue to feed the questions as we go in the chat box, and we'll make sure to focus the discussion on what folks are most interested in. And so I guess maybe I'll start with a question for you, Lisa. I know you talked about the sort of the services that that you provide. What is the process for a typical charge-ready project from beginning to end? What does that look like? And just to people in their mind can imagine sort of the journey they would go on if they engage with you on this.
That's a great question, Zach. So the process begins again with determining the need for charging stations at a property and determining how many EV charging spots will be appropriate for that property as well. And a couple of things I want to highlight there. We'll work with you. Edison will work with you to find an appropriate location that's going to be workable for you as well as affordable on the program side. We have to maximize these program dollars to serve as many customers as possible. And in doing so, we're going to want to look at the site, figure out where's the existing transformer. We don't want to be too far away because that really drives up the cost of a project. But we'll work together to figure out where will this work for residents, for the owners, and for the utility. So it begins with an application. It begins with determining what's the number of charging ports that the site wants to put in, having a map of where they believe they would like them to go in. And then we work together to determine what kind of charging station you're going to put in, and just visiting and verifying the site and making sure that that all looks workable. As I mentioned, our TE advisory services will help you if you don't know where to begin, if you're not sure how many charging stations you need or where it's best to place them. And after we got an application, determine how many you're installing, where they're going, we're going to do all our due diligence, come up with a proposed design, and get the applicant's sign off on that design. At that point, when we get agreement from the program applicant and the building owner, if there's a different entity, now we'll lock in the funds for your project, and we get to do the full design and permitting process and construction for there. So these projects can be done, in, the amount of time varies, and a lot of that depends on approvals and permits and the like. We got slowed down by COVID, just like Miguel's project a little bit, but we've done so many of these now. We understand and know how to get through the permitting process very efficiently. So it's working together. We need to work together, get those sign-offs and approvals from you. But we'll walk you through and guide you through, the whole process end to end.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. And a couple question, I think for both Abigail and Miguel, so maybe you can both separately answer this for your organizations, but obviously, your organizations are a little bit farther along this journey than maybe some other organizations that are starting on. If you think back to when your organization was beginning this journey and saying, hey, maybe we should start to think about this stuff. Like, how did you get started evaluating your portfolio for things like, electric vehicles and charging? What was the initial research process as you think back to those kind of initial days that maybe some of your peer organizations are going through now? So maybe I'll start with Abigail with that question, and then Miguel, I'd also love to hear your answer to that as well.
Sure, thanks, Zach. I guess I can just give an overall summary response. At Self-Help, whenever we are developing a new property, we consider what services we can provide to that development. So we consider all possible services, including electric vehicle charging stations and programs like MioCar. So it is just part of our evaluation when we are developing the project plan. But I do want to say that specifically for MioCar, once the idea came up, we wanted to ensure that the community itself was supportive. So we did have small focus groups with the residents from each of those communities to ensure that there was interest and there would be utilization of the service.
Thank you. Miguel, do you want to sort of answer the same question?
Sure. I think for us, one of the things that got us really, we started talking about how do we reduce parking, because I think that's one of the keys for us is how do you eliminate a lot of the cars and get folks to use like this ride sharing service like MioCar. I think those are great services. And the EV charging stations were the only way in. I think there's a couple of them out there, and Zipcar comes to mind, and these, I believe, Blue Car and stuff like that. But for us, where we started, we didn't know. We went straight to our solar consultant. We hire a lot of green consultants that are helping us understand rebates and things like that. And it was, how much is it going to cost? What is it going to be the cost of the development? Was it going to be the cost as owners? We have to make sure we account for everything. And are there any rebates out there? And where do we even start? So that was our initial thought. What we're doing now is a lot of our new developments that are in our pipeline, we're starting to do curb cuts along the front of the street to have easy Uber or Lyft share riding pickup and drop off zones. We're making those more available. And then, yes, we're also designating parking spaces specifically for EV charging stations or EV programs for ride sharing. So I think those would get folks familiar with it, because we are serving the low-income communities. And I think there's that big piece that Abigail was speaking about of education and really making them understand, like, hey, you don't need a car. It's more expensive to park your car, leaving it in the parking lot and not used for maybe twice a day, or if that, right? So it's cheaper to not have a car. And if you need a car, here it is. Here's one waiting for you and for your 20-minute ride to the grocery store. So that's kind of the future that we're looking at. And I'm glad there are different programs out there.
Awesome. Thank you, Miguel. Love that future. And maybe going back to you, Lisa, maybe sort of a two-part question. You talk a little bit more about sort of other resources that can be combined with these resources. So maybe are there other resources that Edison has separate from this, like around the vehicle side of things that maybe could be used to kind of add to the overall package, but then also how does Charge Ready kind of interact with other incentive programs, maybe at the local or state level? Can they be combined together with your funding? Is that sort of stacking a possibility? So anything you can speak to in terms of other programs that could be brought into the mix here would be great.
Sure, absolutely. Yes, our Charge Ready program and incentives are stackable with other incentives. So the only thing we look out for is that we're not paying for more than 100% of the site's cost, of course. But they are stackable with other incentives. Also on the vehicle side, right? I mentioned our used EV rebate and our California Clean Fuel Reward. So that used EV rebate is stackable with incentives like Clean Cars for All or Replace Your Ride. And so, put those together and it really brings down the cost of a fantastic, vehicle, really an efficient vehicle. We're talking about electric vehicles, but that includes plug-in hybrid electric vehicles that
that. So maybe again, starting with Abigail and the same question.
Thanks, Zach. So yeah, like I mentioned in my presentation, of course, coming up with upfront capital costs was a challenge and continues to be. Also, ADA parking requirements are a challenge. Not being able to provide 24-hour free charging is an issue. And I think it's something that needs further, consideration, because if we are going to be providing charging stations to low-income people, that is a great first step. But people need to be able to afford to charge their cars. So free charging is a hurdle, and is something that we should all work towards together.
And I think for me, one of the challenges for EV charging station, I think it's that education component. And it's not just an education component for the residents and having them using it, but it's also as we're developing our plans, there's an education component happening to the city staff, right? And making them understand like, hey, this is part of our parking plan, and how do they count it, right? And there's that, you have to also bring city staff who are approving your plans. There's an education component there. There's obviously an education component to us as owners that we're developing these parts, and the rebates, the incentives, the things are always changing. So I think having the right experts educating us and how we can make this happen, because at the end of the day, we're all heading towards the same goal of reducing greenhouse emissions and really trying to go all electric. So for us, it's just a matter of how do we have that everybody on the same page. There's that educational level. I think that's Zach, for me, that is the hardest part, is getting everybody on the same page and pushing forward.
Awesome. Thank you both. And I think I'll one question I'll pose to all three of you, and then I think we can sort of transition into sort of the Q&A with everybody here. But this is a great conversation. I think, as we think about this, we're going through a lot of change right now, right? This is a big technological change, and, just like with any period of technological change, sometimes it can be hard to kind of like see over the horizon where this is going. But when you all think about this, whether it's from a technology perspective or just in terms of the residents that you serve, like what kind of future do you feel like that we're building towards as you kind of imagine like when this stuff really hits its stride over the next, 5+ years, and just to kind of help paint a picture so that people understand kind of what the, what this is all working towards. So yeah, maybe we'll start with Lisa, and then Abigail and Miguel. But I think that would be great to hear your thoughts about the future.
Thanks, Zach. We're looking forward to a future with blue skies and silent highways, right? Clean communities, healthy communities. That's what EVs can bring us when you have no tailpipe emissions, when the grid is cleaner and cleaner, and you have these nice, quiet, efficient vehicles without a lot of vibration and noise. Just a more sustainable future for California, healthier communities, less asthma, lung disease, and exhaust choking our communities and harming our residents and our children. I think that's the future we're looking towards. Maybe we don't get all the way there in 5 years, but that's what we really are looking at building and what motivates us to get through the first 5 years and beyond.
Thanks, Zach. I think in order to answer this question, we must really reflect on the history of the communities that we are serving, right? We are trying to serve communities that have historically been left behind. We are serving communities whose infrastructure is not up to par because they're always last on the list. I think in order to have the future that I see, we must look at this opportunity as an opportunity to service disadvantaged communities or low-income communities first and put them at the forefront of these technologies. There is enough money out there that we can do that, and there's no need for these communities to continue to have to suffer and go last. I envision a future where access to clean transportation is readily available. And I think that is very possible. I think it's possible to eliminate the stress of families not being able to find a ride to take their child to the doctor. All of that is very possible if we consider the things that we talked about and really look at opportunities to get over these hurdles and keep the end in mind, right? And the goal here is to serve these community residents who deserve the equal access to EV chargers and clean mobility as those who live in more affluent parts of the state.
Well, great responses. Coming in at the end, I think for me, what I'm noticing I've been doing real estate development for a while now, and I think one of the exciting parts is that it looks like California has been moving forward towards these sustainable communities, and I think that's going to be the future. Right, we're seeing it now. So I forgot to mention for Idaho, a lot of our footprint is all around Southern California, in Los Angeles County, Riverside, San Diego, and Orange County. And for us, what we're noticing is that there's this big move towards transportation, rapid transit transportation, being able to have these 160 unit complexes being next door to these high train stations. So that in itself will reduce the need for cars. I mean, I've been keeping an eye on the chat, and there is definitely for us, and we've developed projects where there's the bike share. We're widening the roads with the cities as part of our project. The City of Los Angeles has been a great partner on a lot of some of our deals where they are working with us to widen roads, do bike lanes, do these things that we should have done a long time ago. And I think that's the future for us. It's really, how do we combine housing with the transportation infrastructure? How do we bring it up to date and make it cohesive so that the folks that do require a car or do require transportation, how do we get them to take a train rather than their car? How do we get them to take a bike or take an Uber rather than their car, right? It's just we have to facilitate that. So I think that's the future for us, being able to when I look for projects, that's the first thing I look at is how do we become innovative and bring things that are non-traditional and that make sense.
Awesome. That's a great future. I want that future. So I think we're going to start to gear up towards more of a Q&A. I know there's a bunch of questions in the chat box. I feel like most of them are being answered in the chat box. I'll go through and pick out one or two more. And then if folks know how to use the raise your hand feature, if you go to reactions in Zoom, there's an opportunity to raise your hand. we'll go through and just take open questions from from anyone who has any questions here. I did see a good question here from Tyler. Looks like Lisa responded from SE's perspective, but maybe for Abigail and Miguel, sort of similar to Danny's question, active transportation of self-help and IHO worked with city planners on developing more accessible transportation infrastructure. So, and I think it speaks to what you were getting at, Miguel, but just in terms of actually engaging with local jurisdictions in the planning process to support that, is that something that either of your organizations have done or explored?
Abigail, I'll take it. I'll let you answer maybe second. I think for us, we have, yes, that is part of when we go sit down with the planning encounters or we're looking at deals and we meet with city staff. Part of our initial entitlement process is really like looking at all the transportation alternatives that are out there and how does the city want to see themselves grow, right? If there's not it really starts there, because if the city's not really invested in it, then there's really no need for there's going to be a lot of money, a lot of resources being spent, and then that would be part of our internal go no go on these projects. So for us, I know, like for example, the city of Santa Ana in Orange County, what we're doing is we're meeting with them and figuring out ways to bring additional bus transportation lines to disadvantaged communities, because the bus doesn't come as often as it used to. So it's like, okay, how do we work together with the city to use alternative modes of just using your typical car? So yes, for us, I did mention City of LA. There's the ASIC funds that we, as housing developers, have been using. That's the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Program through HCD. And that in itself, as affordable housing developers rely on that funding source. And the whole point of that program is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And you do it by reducing parking and reducing cars. So yes, we are looking at alternate modes of transportation, especially with the cities being a partner.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here. Self-Help Enterprises really values our relationship with our local transportation departments. I will say that not all of them are cities, because we are helping, we're working with rural areas. Many times we're working with county transportation departments as well. But, as one of the largest affordable housing providers and community development provider in the San Joaquin Valley, we know that it's very important to have these relationships and engage with transportation providers. And yes, we are often in ongoing conversations. And I think that when you develop those relationships with transportation departments and cities and county jurisdictions, they really start to value the perspective of affordable housing. So I just want to encourage anyone who hasn't already done that to really build on those relationships, because you can get a lot more done when you work together.
Awesome. Thank you both. And like I said, if people want to ask a question live, they can go to the reactions button and raise their hand. You can also just put your question directly in the chat box. That's easier, and we'll just answer the question live. And if we don't have additional questions for you, I'll just kind of fill in the gaps with other kind of broad-based questions that we have for the panel. But we definitely want to hear from you. And obviously, the big takeaway here is everybody's going to have a lot of questions that are very specific to their portfolio, their specific situation. And so that's why we have all this great information about next steps to engage with Edison and their advisory services. So not currently seeing any raised hands. And so maybe I'll ask a very specific question about our favorite topic, which is parking spaces. And again, probably a question for Miguel and Abigail, but I think one of the things that we've seen, kind of come up, particularly in the context of retrofits, so not necessarily putting this into new construction, but in retrofitting existing housing complexes, is this question of how do you deal with the intersection of having dedicated charging spots with, for example, properties that have assigned parking spaces? And for lack of a better term, the politics of the parking lot. Like, how have you wrangled with those issues in the retrofit projects that you've done, where it's an existing complex where people already kind of have their places that they park?
I don't mind starting, just because we have run into this with many of the multifamily and affordable housing sites that we've worked with, right? And so one thing I want to emphasize is that the decisions over how to make the parking available, how to assign parking spots, obviously stays with the property manager. That we don't look to control any of that. Some best practices maybe, that we can share is how you locate the charging ports, and depending on your parking configuration, but locating them so that they have multiple connectors and can serve multiple actual parking spaces from one unit helps with that. The site themselves can determine, do these need to be dedicated only to EV charging, or are they open spaces? Do you need to move parking assignments around as needed, and all of that? Those are some of the best practices that we've run into. In terms of actually losing parking spaces, the only impact sometimes is with ADA. Where you may go from 3 to 2 to make an accessible space, but we do understand that that's a challenge, and we have helped many multifamily properties work through that challenge. Other solutions are using the visitor area, and maybe somebody pulls in for the couple hours that they need to charge and then pulls out back to their own dedicated space. So, many different options, and we try to be as flexible as possible in terms of helping to determine where's the best place to locate those chargers.
I'll chime in. So yes, Zach, parking spaces is a hot topic, and it's always difficult to find places to locate the chargers, in an existing property. And I think Lisa did a good job talking about the challenges in deciding where should you locate the chargers. But I do want to just give you something else to think about, is that after the fact, when you've decided where your charger is going, that it can continue to be a problem. Especially, for our program, MeoCar, we were required to have a dedicated parking space for the vehicles. That means that no one else can park there. And when vehicles are coming in and out all day long, the parking space itself is often empty. And we have to deal with people who are with non-MeoCar vehicles parking in those spaces. So it becomes, the responsibility of usually the property manager to have to go out there and politely ask someone to move their car. But this is really something to think about, because we don't want to be in a situation where someone is returning the MeoCar that's supposed to be in that parking space, and there's a guest park in that spot, and there's nowhere to park it. So it's just something to consider. Possible solutions. We have tried painting the logo MeoCar across the parking space. We've have signs. We've tried different ways. It continues to be something that we're working on together. But as people become more familiar with the MeoCar program, they become more respectful of the parking space. So it takes time, but we'll get there.
And for IHO, we haven't really done a full-on retrofit of our existing portfolio for EV charging stations, but we are exploring that idea. And I think we're having a good relationship with the property managers and working with the tenants. They are your lifesaver to really figure out, like, okay, how are we gonna move people out of their parking spaces? Who's willing, who's not, and who doesn't have a car, who does? And then maybe even giving them incentives. We've toyed with the idea of giving them some sort of financial incentive in order for them to give up their parking space and use a different car.
Awesome. Thank you all. And maybe, Lisa, I see a question in the chat box about fuel cell zero emission vehicles. Obviously, there's a whole other, set of conversations about the technology, but maybe if you could just sort of speak briefly to the sort of the fuel cell kind of opportunities to the extent they exist under whether it's this program or other kind of programs that SCE is involved with.
Sure, I think it's a good question. I think it's a technology readiness issue. there's not, I don't think today, an adequate, fueling infrastructure for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles either. And so I think you tend to see adoption around where there are fueling stations already. And they, they're quite expensive projects to install. I know that there is, state funding to support and build out that hydrogen infrastructure. There's also, growing number of vehicles, but not a large amount. The way we're sort of envisioning how California gets to that carbon neutral 2045 is making about 75% of the passenger vehicles electric, about 2/3 of medium duty vehicles electric, and 1/3 of heavy duty vehicles being electric, and hydrogen being a great solution for long haul trucking and heavy duty vehicles. So, again, that's just our point of view on how we can get to that future, but it's a fair question.
Thank you, Lisa. And I see another question in the chat box about sort of what we would consider sort of an adequate amount of stations. It sounds like this particular kind of questioner has 100 more stations coming online soon. Like, how do we know how much is enough? Like, what are we going towards? And maybe anyone can answer this, but like from a housing perspective, are you looking for a certain ratio of charging stations to residents? What is sort of like your goal in terms of getting to the right level of infrastructure? Anyone who feels comfortable can jump in on that one.
Sure. Generally what SCE is looking at our role, we are sort of in the natural role of being an infrastructure provider. But we know that there's other funding and other initiatives out there installing EV charging. So you have Electrify America and other organizations providing that charging network along highways and fast charging network. You also have a large number of EV drivers who will charge at home and will not have as much need for the public charging unless they're going on, say, on a long trip. You have the workplace option. So with the various options, our funding, what we're hoping to be able to accomplish is about 1/3 of the need in our service area, and being complementary with those other funding programs and those other initiatives that are out there. So we can use, our customers' dollars, wisely and efficiently in doing that.
Yeah, so we were fortunate enough to work with UC Davis as a partner on MioCar, and they helped to evaluate transportation trends that helped to decide how many vehicles we would need. However, of course, you have to balance that with how many vehicles you have parking spaces for. So there's different ways to answer the question of, well, how do you know how many vehicles you need, and especially in the context of affordable housing. But I'd like to address that question overall in the context of low-income communities. I really believe that in order for us to get to the future that we have talked about earlier, we need companies like Southern California Edison to make investments across disadvantaged communities, even before the electric vehicle usage ratio makes sense, right? Because right now we are in this this ongoing cycle where we are telling low-income communities the benefits of purchasing electric vehicles and using EV chargers. However, there aren't any EV chargers around for them to use, so it's discouraging them from buying the cars. So I would love to see initial upfront investments in these communities, and I believe that will encourage the future purchase and usage of electric vehicles in these areas. So I want to see more investment first.
Yeah, I think on my end, it would be, well, how much is enough is enough. I think it's more of like one of those chicken and eggs, right? If I'm looking at my portfolio of all the tenants that we have, a lot of them don't have electrical vehicle charging stations. So does the charging station come first, or does the demand come first? And I think that's really what we're trying, it's a wait and see for us, and see if they're as you know, as the tenants get electrical charging cars, then they're going to be requesting electrical charging stations, and I think that's kind of my response.
And if I may just add, our view is if you build it, they will come. That is what we have seen. We began these pilots in 2016, and customers are coming back to us wanting more charging stations because the demand is there and the demand is growing. Having that option at home is critical to many people. A few may have it at work, but when that goes away, or they're working from home, or all kinds of things change, having it available where they live is truly critical. And so again, this is why we focus on helping future-proof buildings, future-proof multifamily buildings. And absolutely, Abigail, we want to get that infrastructure in so that more and more vehicles can come. So we're looking for those affordable housing partners, multifamily partners, and community partners like cities, like businesses, and others who want to partner with us and install that EV charging.
What a great note to end on. Take away two things from this is if you build it, they will come. And Edison is here to help. And there's information in the chat box. We'll follow up with email in terms of next steps if people want to get those advisory services. Also, just another plug for the fact that there's tons of funding also from the California Resources Board to support your residents on the vehicle side of things. And again, Grid is working with them on this Access Clean California project to make it easy to get your head around that too. So lots of resources to support all of your communities, both on the infrastructure side and the vehicle side. And with that, please join me in thanking our great panelists for a really informative conversation. Really appreciate everyone taking their time on this kind of, exciting but cutting edge project and line of work. So thanks to the panelists, thanks to all of you for taking your time, and we'll be following up with more information via email soon. So have a great rest of your day, everyone, and happy charging.